Judah, great to meet you. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely.
First of all, heard a lot about you. Want to hear about the music production. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in music and what music does to you.
Sure. So I'm a film person. So I've worked in music videos for many years, and I work in, I do all types of film production. I do narrative work, short form work, commercials, industrials. I've done the gamut, TV shows. But when I was in college, my aunt's agent was at William Morris Agency, and I went in for a big talent agency in New York City, and I went in for an interview. And when I interviewed, they told me you have some of the worst office skills we've ever seen. And I wasn't much of a student at the time, and so they asked me, "How did you get this interview? Because you're really terrible at all this, office work." And I said, "Well, my aunt's agent got me the interview." And they said, "Who's your aunt's agent?" And I said, "Robert Gottlieb." And he's turns out that he's the head of literary, so he's a very, very big agent. And so she said to me in the interview, she said, "Listen, I have to give you a job, so I'm sending you to the music department because everybody's on drugs, and hopefully you'll manage over there." So that was my into the industry in the music department. So I worked for a very big music agent. His name was Johnny Padell. He actually started the Allman Brothers.
Wow.
And so the Allman Brothers, and there was a hip hop scene in there. They had an agent that did a lot of trying to remember all the different bands then. This was like trying to remember what years this was. But anyway, so from there, I didn't want to be in the office. I never wanted to be in the office, and so I moved to the film set. And I started working. I was in New York City, and so I started working first on student films. And then it was just when the whole hip hop music video scene was just starting to, it was just popping off. When I was in high school, there was like, the rap was just starting, and breakdancing. And so that was the whole environment that I was growing up in. And even though I'm a film person, I'm not a music person per se, I'm not a musician. I just started working on music videos. And so I worked on, it has to be over 100 music videos. I worked on, as a technician. I was working in the lighting department. And so I worked on Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Busta Rhymes, Big Puffy, Jay-Z, Missy Elliott. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Just so this was a tremendous education. And what was amazing about the music video scene was that they wanted the flashiest stuff in front of the camera. So they did the biggest setup. So all these equipment that you would only use like in a movie for like, the most large setups, they were using, they wanted it to be the most spectacular, stuff happening in front of the camera possible. So I was learning just tremendous, using equipment that I would never dream, cranes and all these very, exotic lighting equipment and special effects. So it was a tremendous education in filmmaking. And there I was in the midst of these things, hang out with, Jay-Z, Puffy. And so eventually, it's a very Jewish business. And so, the music business and also the film business. So in New York, it's a little bit different than LA. In New York, there's like, everybody's working on the set, but they have their eyes on being a director or an actor. Or in LA, it's a little bit more like if you start in the lighting department, you die in the lighting department, or you start as a grip, or you start as a camera person. There's like it's almost like a tier system, like different communities. But in New York, there's more mobility within the on the set. People who start off as like, the dolly grip, all of a sudden they're directing like, Sex and the City, one of the episodes, because they're on the set all the time. So they're able to like, they understand the characters. And so I worked on the music video sets, and I approached one of the record label people, and I started to schmooze him, and I said, "Listen, I want to direct," and he said, "Okay, you and everybody else." And so anyway, one day I was on the set. We were in Florida. Am I talking too much?
You're talking great.
Super exciting. Keep going.
Thank God. Okay, good. I don't want to overdo it. So I was on the set working in the lighting department. I was a gaffer, and I'm on the set with doing a hip hop video. And the director, who was a very talented music producer, but he wasn't somebody who spent his days on the set. And so what happens is the technicians, the dolly grip and the gaffer and the makeup artist and all the people who live on the set, they kind of, they're seeing, day after day, they're seeing music videos being created. So they know how to do everything. So this guy was a nice guy. He was a very talented producer, music producer, but he didn't know like how to set the camera up, and he didn't know how to do these things. So we were on the set, and he wanted to have the guy, the singer, the rapper, on a jet ski. So he told the guy to go out on a jet ski, and we had a long lens on the camera, and he said, "Okay, we're gonna film you." And he didn't. I said to him, "No, that's not how you do it. You have to put him on the beach. You don't really put him on the jet ski. You put him on it's called poor man's process. So you put him on the jet ski, and you have two PAs like shaking the jet ski back and forth, and you shoot it in a way that it looks, and you see the water behind. So it's a fake for that thing. You don't actually do the thing. It's like when somebody's driving a car in the movies, they're not actually driving a car. They're on a process trailer. And so he didn't understand that. So I showed him how to do that. And the record label person who was on the set was very appreciative that I was helping him so much. And they came over to me and they said, I'm gonna get you a job. One day I'm gonna get you, I'll get you a directing job in a music video. So year later, I'm in Manhattan, and I'm on this film set. I'm on the street, and I'm a lighting person, so I'm running cables. So it's a very dirty job because you're laying cables down for the heavy lights, the electricity, right? So it's very heavy cables, and you're lying them down in the street, and it's very dirty because as you pick them up, you have like dog shit on the cables. So it's like one of the worst, moments of your life is when you're picking up these cables. And you have to clean them. You're touching filth because they're in the streets. So as I'm rolling up this cable, and I'm like, this is my life. I'm like, I'm touching dog shit. Here I am. My phone rings, and it's this guy, Jeff Panzer, who's the head of music at Motown Records, and he said, I remember I told you on the set that I was going to give you a job, and so that's when I got my first music video directing job. That way, that's how I got the phone call. So that was my in music videos, and I directed a video, I think, for Foxy Brown and Spraga Benz. So some yeah. So that's yeah.
And then what happened? So you're in this like experience of like, is this what my life is? You get this phone call, the perfect timing. You start directing music videos. Then what happened? Because you're definitely on some trajectory in the entertainment music business.
So it's amazing. It's an amazing question, and the answer is I was really bad at what I should have been doing, and so now I can coach somebody and tell them exactly what to do. But at the time, I was doing all the things that I really wasn't. First of all, I was a bit of a wild guy, and so I was hyperactive and kind of enjoying my life, and so I wasn't really as focused as I should have been. When I look back, it's like I get heart palpitations because I'm like, wow, I could have done more quickly if I would have been more focused. But so it's a weird world where you're like, one day I'm on the set as setting up lights, and then so I would say I was getting a job directing like every 3-4 months, and so most of my life I'm still on the set, and so you learn a lot of tricks. So one of the tricks you learn is that, a lot of the people who work in film in the States, they're bi-coastal. So you work in New York and you work in LA. And back in the day, you can get a flight for like $400 a round trip. So even if you're making $700 a day for a 12-hour day working on the set, you can afford, if it's a 3-day gig, you can afford to fly in and fly out. And so one of the things that we learned is that when you're trying to climb the ladder, if you show up if you're from New York and you show up in LA, nobody knows that you're like, oh, that guy's just like setting up lights. I know that guy. He's not really a director. He's a technician and whatever. They don't give you the respect. But when you come to LA, they don't know who you are, and they see you on set, and all of a sudden they're like bringing you coffee, and they're telling, asking you what you want and all this stuff. So that's one of the tricks about how to climb the ladder. But the answer is that on the days off, you really have to be, people think a freelance job is less time and energy than a full-time job. But the truth of the matter is that, you have to do everything. You have to be your own agent, and you have to be your own manager and your own salesperson. So what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to be calling up every single person that you know and being very, very, pretending that you're doing everything and that very exciting things are happening, and it's obnoxious a little bit because you have to sell yourself. But one of the main tricks that I tell young people who are starting in the business is when you have your job, that is when you should be selling yourself, not when you don't have your job. So let's say somebody gives me a job to do a music video, and it's not a very big music video, but we're going to spend some money on this location. So we're going to have a very fancy camera and a fancy location, some actor that people know. That's when you want to invite somebody for lunch, somebody who you want to get a job from, and say, hey, I'm really busy. I don't have any time. Do you mind stopping by on the set? And maybe at lunch we can have a conversation. Obviously, you have all the time in the world. You have, a whole week where you're not doing anything but sleeping and being worried that you're not going to work. But you invite people when you're working, and then that sells you. It's, oh, wow, this guy's working. So nobody wants to get a job to somebody who's not working. So that's the trick. And then let's say you're editing a project and you're at a fancy editing suite. One of the things in LA and New York is they have these beautiful suites with a pool table and a chef and everything, masseuse at the place. And it's like, you feel like you're in heaven, and they spend all this money on, to impress people with the post-production facility. These places some of them are just magnificent. And so that's an opportunity for you to invite somebody to, come down for a handshake or a meeting. They come in and, wow, they see this place. And so those are just some of the tricks of the trade, is you have to look like you're busy all the time and that you're working all the time. And it's just a lot of relationships. You have to always do right by, when you're in a situation where you're getting a job freelance, no matter what happens, you have to do right by the other person. So you have these beautiful relationships where, hopefully everybody is giving everything to the other person. In other words, I can't let this guy be unhappy under any circumstances. Even let's say somebody makes a mistake, I have to pay for it and make it look like it's no big deal, instead of saying, hey, you made the mistake, you paid for it, you did something wrong here. You can't do any of that. You really have to just be it's like all giving and all you have to, the relationship is everything when you're working in this kind of situation. You can never ever disappoint somebody, and that that's like the kiss of death. So there's a lot of pressure that way, but it also trains you to be hopefully a decent human being.
So there's a lot of pressure. You're making these connections, you're getting work, you're directing music videos. Where does that evolve to for you?
So I'm a narrative person. So there's one thing that you see in, let's say, New York and LA, and I'm sure the same thing is true in Tel Aviv or any big world city, is that everybody is talented. You're not really going to come across somebody when you're working in a place where everybody, the cheapest rate is $500 a day. It goes all the way up to like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a day. Everybody is very talented, and so you have to look for a niche where you're doing something that is, that you have something unique that you're doing that people will say, oh, it's your brand. And so I was always a very narrative. My first love is narrative, and so when I made music videos, my strength would always be in the treatment. I would write a treatment that would be very, very, narratively driven and understandable, and people, wow, this is a great idea. And so that was my strength in music videos. But at the same time that I was doing music videos, I was working on any job that I would get hired for in the lighting department. So I was working on commercials, on TV shows. I worked on Sex and the City. I worked on, all DKNY commercials, Victoria's Secret commercials, just David Letterman. I mean, I could go on and on about all these. So I'm constantly going from all the different, these different genres or formats, or however you want to say it, TV shows to movies. I worked on easily well over a dozen independent films. And so at the same time that I was working in music videos, the same people that I know were jumping to commercials or jumping to movies. And so I had a parallel track where I was actually working in on movies, and I got a break working as an actor. So I had a friend who was in some workshop, and they were rehearsing with a script, a scene from a movie, and the guy was a Hollywood writer, and he was a Yale guy. He taught at Columbia University teaching this workshop, and they were going on the script, and somebody in the class said, I know a guy who could play this role. He's like, that's literally his life. It was about a Jewish kid who was self-loathing, and he became a Nazi, a skinhead. It was a very interesting scene. And so this guy came to me and he gave me the pages and he said, Judah, read this thing. This is like so you. This kind of like, you could play this. Even though I wasn't a professional actor by training, I was working with actors all day long. And so, and I, why not? So I actually sent a video of myself reading this part. And the guy, who was a very big Hollywood director, his name is Henry Bean, and he wrote Internal Affairs. His wife is a Hollywood writer. She wrote Desperately Seeking Susan. He wrote Mulholland Drive, a lot of big movies, a Hollywood writer, A-list Hollywood writer, brilliant guy, also from Yale University. And so I sent the thing and he immediately called me, and lo and behold, there I was acting back in the day, we used to do this thing where they used to make a trailer to raise money for the feature. This was like in the independent, this was like, all the New York, I'm trying to remember, Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee and all these, these independent Hollywood, independent New York directors. So there's a whole scene of independent film there. And so what they used to do is people used to like make a trailer and then shop it around Hollywood for money, and they said, so this guy wanted to make a trailer. So he cast me in the lead role. And and I was amazing in it because even though I'm not an actor, I can do me on camera. I can be a fast talking New York Jewish guy. If that's what you want, I can do that on camera. So I have tremendous respect for real actors who can be, transform on camera. They can become something. But anyway, so I ended up, I'm in this short film and with this director, and lo and behold, this whole process progressed because he was like a Hollywood insider, and it became the movie The Believer. When they actually made the full movie, they cast Ryan Gosling. And so now this is a long story, but can I keep going?
Yeah, this is great.
Okay. So I'm in this trailer with this, I'm in this trailer and there's no money there, and we're making this film on weekends, shooting 3 or 4 scenes to make this trailer. So then it happens, it goes, this guy goes back to his Hollywood life. I'm no longer really involved in the project, but he's trying to get the movie made. So a year later, he comes back to me and says, Judah, we're making the movie. We have money. They got $2 million to make this movie. And so the first idea was for me to play the lead, which I myself was telling the guy, listen, I know you're excited by how I look in these 3 scenes, but I'm not a professional actor, and I'm worried about doing a whole film where you have to have like the chops to be able to come in every day with new pages. And not only that, but there's scenes that are nuanced. You're not the tough guy, you're the weak guy, and and transforming. And so I would had my own apprehensions about taking on the role. But then what happened was the bank wouldn't give us the money without having a star in the lead role, which is the way they financed the movie. So we went on this amazing, and at this point I was really part of the process. I was helping writing the screenplay, and I was becoming very close with the director, who's introducing me to Hollywood people. So it was a very big deal in my life. And so we started interviewing all these up and coming actors, and we interviewed. So I was in the room with all these Hollywood actors who we were reading them to see if they could do this part. And the last guy and the director was like, no one can do what Judah's doing here, because they were not. I grew up Orthodox Jewish, and so I have this natural understanding. And also and then we can get into this conversation about Kabbalah and spirituality, but there's a paradoxical nature to this guy's character that is hard to wrap your head around. How are you a Jew and a Nazi at the same time? And so this is something that is, intellectually and emotionally hard to wrap your head around. So the actors themselves are not doing a really good job with this. Anyway, we got Ryan Gosling at the last guy that we interviewed, and he was pretty good. And so they ended up hiring Ryan Gosling. At this point, he wasn't Ryan Gosling. He was just a working actor who was on what they call the short list in Hollywood, which means that they want him to be a star. So he's doing all of these, he was on Hercules TV show and the Mickey Mouse Club, and he had a few bit parts, but they were grooming him already to be a lead actor. So they said, if you take this guy, we'll give you the $2 million. And so we took him, but the director was like, the conversation was, Judah's better at the role, but the bank won't give us the money. So we have Ryan now. And so Ryan was a brilliant actor, but he was quintessentially not Jewish. He's from Canada, and he's like a real, like, grass-fed, milk-fed Gentile, and he's an amazing guy, and he's a brilliant actor and a cool guy. And so what they did was they said, Ryan, we want you to live with Judah for a month so that you can, try to become, let Judah, he'll try to explain to you what we're talking about being Jewish. And so we were sitting in a cafe in New York City. This is the end of the story. So we're sitting in a cafe in New York City. And I said to him, Ryan, let's talk politics. Tell me something you care about. And so he said, I don't remember what he said, but let's say it's the environment. And he gave me an impassioned argument for why we have to take care of the environment. And I said, fantastic. Now, in a split second, I want you to just switch sides and tell me the exact opposite, take the exact opposite argument. And he was like, a little bit, taken aback. First of all, he's a kid. He's like 20, I don't know how, 20 something years old. And so he's like, found that very jarring. He said, no, this is what I believe. I said, I don't know. I want you to believe the opposite now. And, and he's an actor, so he wrapped his head around it. And then he was able to do that exercise because that's what they do to you in acting class, right? They tell you to, try out all these things. So he did that with heroically, and he made an impassioned argument against. And I said to him, now I want you to believe both those things at the same time. And now you're Jewish. So that was what I, tried to explain to him, that the paradox is what's important for Jewish thinking, that you have to be yourself and the opposite at the same time. You have to be able to, move between positions and occupy oppositional spaces. And that's what when we had that conversation, he really got it, and he really did an amazing job with the role. And it won Sundance. I don't know if you know the movie, but it won first place, the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance.
Wow.
This movie.
Wow.
What was the movie called again?
The Believer. You can see it. It was on Netflix for a while, but it's available everywhere. You can definitely locate it, and it's a wonderful movie. I'm in the movie as an actor, but I play a bit role.
So you help get this movie, The Believer, launched. You coach Ryan Gosling. You have a lot of experience making this happen. You're in the world of Hollywood. What happens next in the journey of you going from director to actor to coach to being in the world of the Hollywood film?
It's a beautiful question, and the right question. And the answer is, it's not a very pretty picture. So I was working for many years, and I was having a great time doing that. I was working sometimes as a technician, sometimes as an actor, sometimes as a writer, and sometimes as a director, which I do now. That's what I do. I can do all those things because I spent 20 years on the set, and so I have those skills. And so I was doing all of that, and I was having a very good time as a young guy. I had the motorcycle, and I was going to parties, and I was flying back and forth from LA and New York, and it was a very nice time. I had my 30, I don't know what it was, third or fourth birthday at Nobu, which is De Niro's restaurant in the city, and it's packed with people. So I tasted that life. I didn't get to the point where I would be walking down the street and people would know me, but I would be on a set where people would be treating me very, very nicely. And then, they saw me in a movie, and here I am directing something. And so I was tasting that life, and I was running with those kind of people. And it was a fast lifestyle. And I ended up opening a production company with my brother. But then when I started approaching my, the end of my 30s and the 40s, I started to have, the standard midlife crisis, and wondering where this is going and all that stuff. And I would imagine everybody feels this way, but I feel that there was a guiding hand in my life and that things were happening I always had the feeling that I was in the right time. There's a movie called Almost Famous where one of the taglines the guy says is one of my favorite movies, and one the guy says is, "It's all happening." So I've always had this feeling that I was in the right place and the right time when cultural and social movements were coalescing and something was happening, percolating, and there was so I ended up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan when things were happening, and then I was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, just when the scene was happening, and you could feel it, you feel the energy on the street. I was in LA and Los Feliz when the scene was like starting to pop off. And so I always had that feeling of being in that place where things were happening. And so what I've witnessed over the last 10 years, and I'm sure that you could say this, you can go back 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years and say the same thing, but I think it's more true now, is that, there's this kind of collapse of what used to be happening now, and this is now we're moving into like a more spiritual conversation here, but things seem to start like going wrong in Hollywood and in a lot of these places. I'm talking about just, with COVID and but it started even earlier than that, when it started to feel like, everybody always looks back 20 years and says, that was the real time. I remember the clubs in the 80s, those were the clubs, the 90s, now it's all like passe. Howard Stern had this line called "Jump the Shark." Remember that line? Okay, this is called "Jump the Shark." It's from an old sitcom called Happy Days, where when a sitcom is too popular, it goes on and on and on, and they run out of stories to tell. And so on Happy Days, they had this episode where Fonzie, who used to ride a motorcycle, instead on water skis, he jumps over a shark tank. And so the point is that they had nothing left to do for this guy, and they did so many years, and the guy's already older, and he's heavy and doesn't look like the guy anymore. And it's like Friends, these are not teenagers in New York, they're 40-year-olds, and what are they doing? So it goes on too long. So jumping the shark is when you go on a little bit too long. And so, you start to become desperate. So that I had that feeling that it was happening to me on a personal level, but I also felt there was like some kind of parallel that what are we really doing here? And things started to feel a little bit stale and collapsing, and so that's when I myself started to say, I'm going to make a change. And that's when I moved to Israel.
So you're having birthday celebrations at Robert De Niro's restaurant. You are in the industry. You are achieving your dreams to some extent, and then you have some kind of internal introspection and reflection where you want something new. Why go to Israel? Why was that so clear to you?
Yes, it's an amazing question. And so I was always very spiritual, but reluctantly so. In other words, I didn't make choices because I was feeling this, beautiful glow. I was feeling something's wrong. I'm not happy. Something's not the way it should be. And so I grew up in an observant home, and I was immediately not drawn to any of that stuff. It seemed very not what I wanted, in a very kind of, nervous way. I wanted to escape from this type of lifestyle, and so from like 14, 15, 16 years old, I was already and I lived in New York City, so I had access to this whole other world. So I was going to yeshiva, but even at night, I was going out all night to rock shows and clubs and art shows. And, so it was a very, you live this very kind of strange duality, two lives. And so it was always a part of my identity. And the film business and the music business, you meet a lot of Jewish people. And so you meet a lot of Jewish people who used to go to yeshiva like yourself. And so although you're in a completely different world, there are still people who can say to you something in Yiddish, or say something to you about Good Shabbos, something, so you do meet those similar people. And New York and LA, these places are, it's very dynamic because you have people from all over the world, but there's also, that 30% of the people that you're with are Jewish. So there was always this stream within the whole thing of being, a Jew who ran away from this thing. And so I wrote a screenplay. I write also. I'm a writer director, and so because I had this relationship with Henry Bean, who's this Hollywood writer, and because I was helping with his screenplay, he started mentoring me, and we became very, very close. And so I literally got a private mentor who's a brilliant writer and a brilliant person. And so we're talking about Judaism, and so that conversation started to, it blossomed. It became this ongoing conversation about spirituality, Judaism, the meaning of life. And this is something that I think people don't necessarily, package this conversation this way. But if you think about Hollywood, you're dealing with people who are constructing and deconstructing and analyzing culture. And these are very bright people from Ivy Leagues, and they are culturally secular, and they are, they're versed in all of the philosophies of the world, and they even understand things about Torah Judaism and about Christianity. These are just people who know things, and they've studied things. Oh, this guy's read the Quran, and this guy, so you have people who can have very smart, deep conversations about the meaning of life. Why are you writing a movie? What's Shawshank Redemption? What are these movies? These are the stories of us. And so, although you're in a hot tub or you're out in the Hamptons, what are we talking about? We're talking about love and hate and redemption and transcendence. I mean, these are the themes. And so you become although I didn't appreciate it at the time, you're like this, what's it called, like a peasant philosopher. This is really the lifeblood of what's happening here. When you get down to it, I mean, you're not in the room if you're not, whether you're a visual artist, you're a painter, you're a musician, you're not in that room if you're not talking about life, and you're not, right? And so it's at first glance, you might not think that that's what's happening, but that's really what's happening. And so looking back, I realized that I was having a very spiritual journey the entire time. It was just, in Chassidut, we talk about Ratzon V'Shuv, the coming and going force, that you move towards something and you move away from something. And so it's not that when you're moving close to something, you're doing the thing, and when you're moving away from something, you're not doing the thing. No, they're both. In Kabbalah, the term is the right hand pulls you close and the left hand pushes you away, and they're both part of the same process. And so the Baal Shem Tov talks about, he says, I don't care if it's sweet or bitter, I only care if it moves me forward. So, we all know this. You can have a bad day where you have a tremendous amount of growth, and you can have a good day where you go further away from what your essence, from what you want and from who you are. And so the trick is to understand that both things are happening. And whether you're on the Rav Nachman of Breslov, he says you have to become an expert going up, and you have to be an expert coming down. And that when you have an up day and a down day, and they both have their own unique work. And so my whole life, looking back, was all the same work that I'm doing now in spirituality. I just didn't know it. I was moving away from the thing. And there's just as many lessons and just as much growth in that time as you're moving close. So I wrote my first screenplay, and we could talk about it. And it ended up getting optioned, and it was not made into a movie, but I was going through the process of trying to get it made in Hollywood, which got me into a lot of big CAA, William Morris, and all these big companies having the meetings. But and Henry Bean mentored me in this process, and so literally he taught me how to write screenplays. First by me helping him with his movie, and then by him helping me with the screenplay that I wrote. And it turned out, after I wrote it, to be a very, very spiritual movie. It was set in nightclubs. It was about drugs and all the whole undercut, the underbelly scene. But it was a deeply spiritual. We can talk about the movie, but so that was really the beginning of me starting to actively get involved in spiritual themes and seeking out. I didn't start with Torah because I was trying to stay away from that world, but seeking out yoga and Buddhism and all of the the call it like supermarket spirituality, where you're a modern person. One day you go to a Buddhist thing, one day you go to a yoga class, and you go to a drum circle. These are all just things that you do, and it's a hodgepodge. But that was really the beginning of my adult, actively seeking out spiritual knowledge and wisdom and learning. And yeah.
David, do you want to touch on that for a second? And then I got some follow-up questions about the work, and also I do want to hit on this underlying spiritual theme of screenwriting, of the templates, of the content in music videos. But David, do you want to hit on the thing you just mentioned about the paradox? I think it's important.
Sure. I'm just saying I feel really at home in Israel because now that Judah mentioned it, that an essential thing to being Jewish is holding or being able to see things from the opposite of your own, even of your own belief, and examine it that way. And it's something that I always kind of when I looked around myself, it looked like, why aren't people doing that? And when I grew up in Berlin in a non-Jewish environment, and it's that's really the thing that makes me feel at home here. So
Beautiful what you're saying, and it's very true. It's one of the core philosophical traits in Judaism, and it's discussed very, very in detail in Kabbalah about this aspect, and that there you have in the Kabbalistic tree you have Chesed and Gevur, you have all the different forces, and that when you have you look at one and then you look at the other, and then when you try to put two opposites together, there's no way to do that without transcendence. And so there's a whole new thing that happens after so most people are like, hey, I'm conservative, I'm liberal, and it used to be like, okay, maybe we can compromise, but we're not really talking about compromise. We're talking about, let's fully appreciate this aspect and keep the essence of what you're saying, and then look at the opposite, and then let's see, is there any way that we can live with these oppositional forces? And when you do that, you're forced to elevate, you're forced to move above, right? You have to transcend these differences, and that is literally the mechanism by which we evolve and by which we raise our consciousness. And this is the Torah study and all the ritual is really, it's about, in almost, if you want a universal framework for what is going on there. That's really what being Jewish and thinking about these things, it's really what it is that we're trying to somehow manage these oppositional forces. So yeah, you belong here.
Beautiful, thank you, appreciate it. Like now I have about 1,000 questions probably, and also some thoughts, but I think that's a different topic.
I think we're gonna end up there, no matter what we do. I think we're gonna end up in the Kabbalah conversation.
But I'm super excited about us coming back to Tzfat in a bit, and working together and having some time to chat.
Yes, I just want to say that you've been wonderful to me, and that we worked together on some retreats together, and I was very lucky to have somebody else in the room who I could go to, who has technical expertise, because there I was, and I'm like trying very hard to make something happen there and do a good job, and there wasn't a lot of people in the room who are professionals, and I was definitely leaning on you, and I really appreciated your expertise, and we worked together very nicely. And so, Sean, I'm not sure I thank you, but yeah,
I had a ton of fun too.
And you have a beautiful energy. You're very, very supportive, and I'm very attracted to people who are quiet and who are able to, to listen and think and respond, by listening. And I'm working on that myself. I don't have that naturally. So I'm very attracted to it. So yeah, I'm happy that we're friends.
Well, thank you, man. But also on the point, I mean, it's nice to work on it, but also somebody has to, take the lead and make it happen. That's important too.
Yeah,
you definitely produced great content.
I agree.
So going back to want to continue the journey. So you write the screenplay. You're working with Howard Bean. It's about nightclubs. Sorry,
Henry.
Bean. Henry Bean, excuse me. It's about nightclubs and drugs, but there's a spiritual undertone, and you're paying attention to this. Where does that lead you?
So good. Please jump in on me if I go too far into a certain direction. Please don't feel free to jump in and redirect me. But just a little bit about the screenplay. So I wrote a screenplay about it's called Pigment, and it's about two sisters who were born with a rare light sensitivity disorder, which means that they can't go outside. It's called an orphan disease. They actually have, it's a rare genetic disorder, and you basically don't have any protection against the sun. So the only recourse is to stay out of the sun, to live inside at night, and go outside at night, but live inside. And so it actually does exist, but I'm just using it as a jumping off point for my story. And so I have a brother who's very close to me, and we work together in film, and he's a brilliant producer and a very creative person. He's visually his name is Moshe, and he's like my best friend, and we're very similar, but also different in some ways. And so he was the inspiration for this story too, because we were spending so much time together that sometimes the line between where one is, the whole relationship, whether it's healthy or not healthy. And so that was also the fodder for this screenplay. And so the two sisters live in upstate New York, and then they, as teenagers, 14 years old, they run away to New York City because they live in Hicksville, and they're bored, and they spend their nights making clothing and running in the woods outside and then they run away to New York City, where they become nightclub celebrities. They can only go out at night, and so they find themselves in nightclubs, and there they are. And so it's metaphor, obviously, but it's also all about, I didn't realize this at the time, but it's about light. The story, I was working in lighting, which I didn't also make a spiritual connection. I just found myself working in lighting, in film lighting. And then here I wrote a story, and my name is Lazarus, which is Laser, Us. And when you start to study Kabbalah, you start to become aware of people's names. And there actually are a lot of people who study Kabbalah whose names are, I have a friend who studies Kabbalah, he's made of his life, and his name is Brightman. And then there's, somebody who teaches Kabbalah, a very famous person, his name is Lightman. So anyway, it's just cute that the name matches. So anyway, so I made this story, and it's about girls who can't go in the light. And so that's the story, and plays out it's like a coming of age story. It plays out in the nightclubs where one of the girls wants to be normal. One of the sisters, twin sisters, wants to be normal, and the other wants to live hard, live fast and die young. And so although they look exactly the same and they're together all the time, that's the tension. And so that's the story. It plays out, and one of them opts for a experimental cure, which is not a full cure, but a trial. And the other one says, I'm not doing that. I'm staying the way I am. And when I get sick and die, so be it. That's the story. So I wrote this screenplay, and then, that was really also when I was also having identity issues. Who am I? I have, my parents they passed away, but they're the most beautiful. My father was a rabbi, very learned, very gentle, very holy person. And both my parents were supportive no matter what I did. And so I was feeling those kind of feelings of guilt and identity issues. And so that, at some point it dawned on me that my creative work parallels what's happening in my life. And so that's, that was something that developed. It wasn't something it wasn't like an aha moment, but it was like, as I'm going through my years, I realized that, wow, I'm writing about who I am, and who I am is this person who's wrestling with, with identity and with, light versus dark, and, meaning versus anarchy, or, having a good time versus responsibility, all these, classical themes, universal themes. And so at that point, I started doing things like going to Chabad houses. I started reading books in, very deep spiritual books from all different faiths and different, things that I was finding in there was a bookstore in the city in Manhattan that was like Buddhist or just New Age bookstore kind of thing. And so I was spending time there, and that the kind of, and then slowly but surely, I started to, because I was going to Chabad, I started learning Chassidut, which is basically a kind of Kabbalah. We could talk about it, but it's both, it's different than Kabbalah, and it's also higher than Kabbalah in certain ways, and it's a deep conversation. But then I started to study Kabbalah online with a group of people who were based in Israel. And then I took a trip to Israel, and I started to have a connection with Israel. I mean, my father was a Zionist, and my family was always coming to Israel and stuff, but I spent many years not being at all interested in Israel, or it wasn't even in my radar. I was not thinking about Israel. But then, because I started studying Kabbalah, I took a trip to Israel, and that started to, I started a relationship with Israel, coming back to Israel and hanging out here. And so that was the beginning of how I ended up here.
And so, okay, so you wrote this very profound screenplay. It gets optioned. You're in the business. You're having internal processes that's leading you towards Israel and Chabad and learning and depth and meaning. So what's your decision process? What are you looking for, and where does that take you at that stage?
Amazing. So beautiful. I like the question because I don't want to whitewash this. So I was a guy who was very reluctant. I was not looking for change. In fact, I would describe myself as somebody who, I can change in all the ways that are not important to me, but when in the things that are, like all of us, if we have an issue, then, doing everything but dealing with that issue is what we do instead of dealing with the issue. And so I had a certain, like everybody, I have a certain, bag of issues, problems, and things that I don't want to do. I did not want to become observant. I did not want to become religious. I did not want to be all these things. And to say those things would be an understatement. I was repulsed by those things, and there was no way that I was going to do any of those things. And in fact, I was a very sarcastic. I was a very big joker, and so if there was something to make fun of in the room, I was the first person to be making fun of things. So I was not a person who was like particularly respectful of anything that I thought was not cool or not, what I'm about. And so if there's something that, if I was very liberal, conservatives are idiots, and and I would focus my, my comic genius on, tearing them down. So the same thing was true about religion and belief. I remember I was one time in a restaurant with somebody at a bar, and a very brilliant Hollywood person. And he started off a sentence by saying, as much as I don't like to admit that I believe something, and then he said something. And the point is that, in Hollywood, the ideas are what matters, but discussing the ideas, but not believing in something is almost embarrassing. It's not really embarrassing because people do believe in things, but the point is made is that, it's not, faith is something that is looked down upon, and it's something that is looked at as, and now I think that because the world is changing and in crisis, I think people are revisiting some of those things, saying, hey, maybe we're a little bit too, too sure of ourselves when we bashed, the faith communities and the people who are interested in spirituality. I think that maybe the people now are being like, hey, maybe there's something there, because anyway, it's a system that is very, very different than what I was used to. The values and the rules of the game are extremely different. And so I was very reluctant. To answer your question, this whole process for me was not a pleasant, oh, I want to find myself, I'm going to go. Because if I would have done that, I would have ended up in cool religious places. I would have gone to India. I would have gone to like hippie places where you can party and you can have a good time and you can do what you want. It's not, Judaism is not really that kind of system. It's like going to the army. It's you have to do it what they're telling you to do, not what you want to do. And so it's a kind of a brutal system when you engage it authentically and honestly. You have to do things that you don't want to do. It's like, it's like a modern person, the last thing they want to do is have people give them a whole set of rules. When are you going to wake up? When are you going to go to sleep? What are you going to eat? How are you going to date? All these things. It's not what's considered it's not glamour, Hollywood, sexy. It's just the opposite of that. And so I was very, very resistant to this stuff. And so the last thing I want to say on it is that there was a silver lining. And because I didn't want to do it, and because I was really engaging in a way of like, in a reluctant way, saying, I don't really believe this, but I feel compelled to look at it. And so therefore I'm here, but I'm like looking for any excuse to tear this thing down and to say, it's not real, it's not true. Why do this? You know, it's, you know, you do you, I do me, you know, you believe this, I believe that, who cares? It's all just kind of like a big mishmash. And it's just, you know, postmodernism. And this is, you know, these are the people, and there's a whole nother conversation. We talk about podcasts that, like, you know, Eric Weinstein and Lex Friedman and all these other, you know, Jordan Peterson, and the conversation about, you know, Black Lives Matter. And I know I'm going into tangent, but I'm just pointing out that these are almost opposite communities. You know, one of them is postmodern, and there's, you know, there's only a relative truth. There's only, you know, the world is the way, you know, the truth is within you, and your truth is your truth, and somebody else's truth is just as valid, but their truth. And Jordan Peterson talks about like how, although there's some truth there, you have to at the same time hold on to the fact that there is a hierarchical system. Some things are more true than other things, right? So you have these two things happening. And this again comes back to Kabbalah, that, you know, you have Gevura, you have this, you know, the restrictive force, but you also have the giving force, and you have to balance the two. And so, just like we spoke about, you know, I was living completely in one world, the postmodern world of liberal Hollywood. Everything goes, whatever you want to do, whatever you think is true, whatever you know, those are the values. And then I find myself, you know, swinging into a completely different world with completely different opposite values. And so it was anything but pleasant. I was very, very, I felt like my life was falling apart. I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I'm losing everything that I want. I'm like, you know, this cool Hollywood guy, and now, you know, all of a sudden I'm like doing religious things. And so it was a painful experience and a painful journey, but one that was unbelievably rewarding. And that I'm in a place now that I could never have been if I would have just stayed the way I was and stayed in that world.
So how are you processing that? There's like this inherent contradiction. There's the values of Hollywood. You were seeking that. You were evolving. You were succeeding in it. You're pulled towards this spiritual Jewish Israel reality, and there's internal conflicts. How do you manage that? How do you process that?
Very, very poorly. So I am, you know, and there's some, you know, there's a silver lining. If I was a person who was able to manage better, then I wouldn't have had the rapid progress that I had, because I would have been able to make concessions. And I've always been very an extremist. I go to something totally, I want to be, if I'm going to do that thing, I want to do it the most, you know, and go for the, you know, whatever the high octane thing is. You know, I wasn't a subtle person who was, you know, appreciated moderation and balance. And those are things that hurt me in life, but they also were, you know, allowed me to, you know, to hit rock bottom, to get to make a radical change, and to completely, you know, just get to a place where I must change, you know. And that is really one of the secrets to probably most spiritual systems, but certainly in Judaism, is that we change when we must change, not when we want to change. And so I think that, you know, it was a necessity. It just happened to me. And I was very much, you know, I had to address how my relationship with my parents, and they were living such a good life and such a meaningful life and being so giving to me. And yet I was very focused on myself. And so I had that whole, you know, what you describe as a midlife crisis. And so things were falling apart, and I was rebuilding. And so I don't think I would have ended up in Tzfat in Israel if it wasn't a radical transformation, a radical journey that I went on.
So what's the timeline here? You option the film, you're having these transitions, experiences, curiosities, you're on a path. How does that end up to Tzfat? And what's the timeline?
so yeah, this is compressed, and it's very funny because I always make that joke where somebody says, hey, what do you do? And I say, oh, I work in film, and they get all excited, and then I say, Ryan Gosling, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, David Letterman, and so what you do is you compress this thing, and it sounds amazing. But don't understand is that in between that is depression, sleeping, being nervous all the time that you're never going to work again, getting older, people getting married around you, people, actually making real money, your friends who are lawyers and doctors. And, so, it's really something that looks great in a paragraph, but when you stretch it out over time, I was listening to Eric Weinstein, who I listened to his podcast, The Dark Horse, and he was saying how, he was talking to people who asked, he's mentor students, and he would say how, like, that when you opt into a marriage, you have this, you say, oh, wow, this is really hard. But then you hit this place, you get to the sweet spot, and you say, thank God I'm not like single and dating and in that hell. And he said, actually called it a hell. And so, it's amazing how, you have like, it's the very thing that you're running after is literally, is a hell that you get trapped into. And so that starts to happen, when you're 27 and, you're on the set and everybody's partying and everybody's going, you're making this movie and it's a love story and there's nude scenes and everybody's cool and people are famous and you're in New York City, and it's the most exciting. You can't believe you're there. You're like pinching yourself, it's very, very, you get an adrenaline rush and you're like, this is unbelievable. And then, at 32, it's good, but you have to like maybe do a little bit, the drugs have to be a little bit heavier and the parties have to be a little bit wilder, and your job has to be better paid, and then you start, and then what starts to happen is you start to hit the top of the arc where, you're not getting the payoff that you did when you doing what you did at 27 when you're 36 is not the same experience, starts to become this, so you start to seep in a little bit of, there's a pathetic quality to what you're doing. You're not a kid anymore and you're going out, so all that's happening. And so it was a long journey. I think, I usually don't tell the full truth, and I shorten it, because if I really measure the amount of time that it was, it's a solid 10 years. But I usually tell people 7 or 4, like, oh, what happened? Because if I really look at the point where things started to not be excellent and things started to become less and less good, and I'm like, desperation is seeping in, and you're trying harder and you're getting less payoff for what you're doing. You're like I'm saying, like, you're 24 and you're around famous people and you're at a party at the the Spy Bar, whatever it's called in LA. It's you're dizzy. But if you're doing the same thing 10 years later, it's like, okay, and so to answer your question, the journey was slow and bumpy with a lot of dark times, a lot of feelings of when is this going to end? Where am I going with this? My life, focus on what is, they talk about in spirituality about, you have a caterpillar that's becoming a butterfly, and your only choice is whether you identify with the caterpillar that's dying or the butterfly that's being born. And so I spent a lot of my time being angry and resentful about what I'm losing as opposed to what I'm gaining. And so the transition took years of study, prayer, and everything else. People ask me, what do you do to feel better? And I say, everything I can think of, diet, exercise, community, studying spiritual system. It's everything that you could possibly do to get out of a pit of, a feeling that things are not right and that you're not happy. And so I hope that answers the question. It's like, I even when I got to Tzfat, I was still not, I'm feeling Tzfat's been an amazing, and we can talk about Tzfat as a center of healing. It's an amazingly special place. It's like, has like some kind of intrinsic spiritual energy that's here, that's very transformative and very immediate. People come here and everybody says, oh my goodness, I'm in Tzfat. There's something special here. I feel something, it's everybody feels it. You don't have to be particularly connected to feel it. So we can talk about Tzfat in itself, but just as far as the journey, even when I got to Tzfat, which is a year and a half ago, I still felt like I was coming out of a dark place and waking up and getting my life back and coming into and being inspired by new projects and new themes. And we can talk about those projects that I'm doing now, but yeah, so it's an ongoing journey. I feel like I'm in the middle, but I'm in a place now where I can breathe. Whereas there were times when I was in New York and when things were going wrong that I literally felt very, very sick and very bad and very, like just physically not well from the collapse of of feeling that change is happening to me and I don't want it to. And I'm losing my friends and I'm losing the career and and most importantly, out of all the things that are external that a person worries about losing, I was very resentful about losing my feelings. I said, I have a right to feel that God doesn't exist. And I don't like being told that he does. And I feel that that is an intrusion. You start to study religious systems, they tell you, we believe this and we believe that, and you have to think this, and you have to think that. And I'm like, what? This is like a tremendous invasion of your internal space. And so more than the externals, which I've never been super duper materialistic. I mean, I like stuff, but I don't dream about stuff, if somebody has a Ferrari, hey, I'd love to drive a Ferrari, but I don't go to sleep thinking about a Ferrari. I think about fame, I think about popularity, I think about being, meeting a beautiful woman. These are the things that I dream about. I don't dream about things, but the external things were not as troubling to me as losing my right to believe things that are not true, or that are limitedly true. Yeah.
There's a lot of elements that I want to touch on. One of them for now is that specific point of not being able to breathe and having this right to not believe or to decide what you want to believe. Where does letting go? Because you let go, like you didn't hold on. I'm staying in Hollywood no matter what. I'm staying in California. I'm staying in New York. Is letting go part of the process to tune into something else, to tune into something new, to enable a new, better reality for yourself?
Yes, but let me just reiterate. I did try to stay, and I did try to hold on, and I did fight with tooth and nail, and that is literally the definition of suffering, right? And so, first of all, I want to say that all of these spiritual systems are similar in many, many, many ways. And so, I'm not a theologian in Christianity and Islam and Buddhism, but just being a modern person who's curious and who's learned and think, I have enough of an understanding. So I just want to say that there are many things that are the same and there are things that are different. And so that's a separate podcast, a separate conversation, but clearly letting go is a part of every single spiritual system that aims at growth or at transcendence, that is part of the system. And so to answer your question, modern people have their way of accessing that wisdom. They read books and they seek out these type of that information and they put it together themselves. But if you study a spiritual system, they are extremely precise about that part of the process. And so, of course, letting go is a central theme in all of these systems, religious or spiritual, and even social systems, right? It's, if you go to learn how to mountain climb or you learn how to think, they're going to teach you the same thing about how you have to let go of what you think is the right answer so that you can have another answer, right? Or letting go of your own way of feeling so that you can, I remember thinking, they say, I have this tremendous amount of anger, let go of the anger. And I'm like, I will if you tell me how. How do you let go? And for years, I didn't know how, and not knowing how is part of learning how to. Henry Bean, who's my friend, he wrote a screenplay called I can't remember the name of the screenplay right now, but one of the lines that I always remembered, I always loved, is he said it was about a superhero. And so I can't remember the name of the superhero, but let's say, how did you become Batman? And so the guy who was the superhero responded, and he said, by not being Batman. Like, how do you become a guy who can beat someone up? By being a guy who can't beat anybody up. That's what actually makes it so not letting go and not being able to let go is the flip side of being able to let go. And so it's something that you have to learn. But in Kabbalah, it's a central technique within the climbing the ladder of consciousness. And so you have, it's called in Kabbalah, you have katnus, which means smallness, and gadlus, which means largeness, bigness. And so basically, when you let's say you have an aha moment where you understand something anew at a higher level, that's you entering into bigness, into largeness, where you now your consciousness is now, wow, I thought it was like this, but now I see the world as like that, and you see things from a higher vantage point, and you have that rush of feeling of expansion in your mind, that wow, and now I feel openness, I feel that I understand the world, and I'm at one with the world, right? So that's an ongoing infinite process where when you get there, but then what you have to do then is you have to re-enter into smallness, into a place of saying, maybe there's an even higher way of thinking about this. So you have to let go. So in the Kabbalah and the Talmud are the same, talking about the same landscape. They just have talking in a different language. So in the Talmud, this is described by this, it says the sages prayed to forget all their Torah from the day before. So what does that mean? Why would you want to forget all the wisdom that you know? And so the answer is surrender. What you're talking about is that if a person wants to understand something outside of themselves, they have to let go of what they think. And so this is literally the process of you constantly have to find the truth and then let go of it so that something higher than you, information, wisdom, energy, light, can then find you. You have to be open to the new thing. And so the advantage of being part of a spiritual system or a religious system is that you have the structure, and this is where I would like David to come in and maybe comment about this, because I went to these music retreats, and it's so Kabbalistic, the concepts. When the teacher's name is Imbar, he was teaching these classes, Garon, and he was saying how, you have structure and flow. So the advantage of having a spiritual system, having a community, and having books and having a teacher is that you have the structure that allows you more flow, to have flow. If you're a secular person, if you're not a religious person, you have all flow. In other words, if I feel like surrendering, I'll surrender, but I don't have the rituals and the information and the structure to facilitate that it's much harder work. It's much slower work. So to answer your question, yeah, surrender is the key ingredient to this whole process. But how do you do that? And how do you continually do that? How do you incorporate that into your life? And that's where these spiritual systems have something to teach. You can teach that. You can become expert at riding that wave, the wave of consciousness, of moving through these states of surrender and acquiring a new understanding, and then falling back, and not be surprised by it, not feel like you're being knocked over by a wave. Like, oh, I'm in godless right now. I know the way the world works. And then you have a day where you feel like nothing makes sense. You say, oh, I'm in katnus right now. So if you have those words, that the spiritual vocabulary from Chassidut and from Kabbalah, you can, it takes away you have the pain, but you don't have the suffering, right? You know what's happening to you. So that takes half the problem away, because you know what's happening, right? Is that a short enough answer?
Like I resonate with what you said in many ways. For me, there is a big thing of just basically, I don't know how to say it very well, but it's actually perfectly given just in the beginning of the Torah, I think, with like speaking to the burning bush, and it says like ani ha'ani, and then you go to so basically it's like it's already in you, in a sense, if you could just stop trying to make it happen or figure it out. You know, if you could just leave in that sense slavery, or like this is basically what everything we know from yesterday is. It's a prison for our mind, for our consciousness. It's like a, you know, like a. So then once we leave it, we have to be in the desert, and it takes trust, and it's uncomfortable as hell, but it's also the most beautiful thing. And especially once you say, like that happened to Ari and me about a year ago. That's why we started this project. Ari is more like he's a lot more connected in that sense. He has a really visionary. But we were just okay. That's it. Like we know where we're going. This is like crystal clear. But still, all this fear and all the strategizing and all the it took Ari almost a year to say that's it. I'm leaving my job to go all in. Even though we knew it back then, we were certain. It's not easy.
So there's still a lot to cover. I think we might need to have like a 5-hour session. I also want to tell you about what we're doing with Soji. Definitely hear your thoughts on that. Can we hear a little bit about what you're working on now? And then we'll try and full circle where David and I are at, and maybe a little bit about myself. But I'd love to hear about what you're doing now and how that's been being in Tzfat for you.
Sure. So 7 years ago, I'm saying 7 years ago, but I'm not sure it's 7 years ago. When I started studying Chassidut and Kaballah, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who's a filmmaker. He became a Chabad Chassid, and we used to work at MTV as an editor. He called me up. He said, there's people who are looking for a real filmmaker who knows about Kabbalah for a job. And so I went in for this interview, and I just went off. I was at that point, I was studying. I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to study Kabbalah. And I was very, very into it. And I had investigated all the different groups, Kabbalah Center and B'nai Baruch and Chabad and all these different places. And so I just went, the guy asked me, well, what do you know about Kabbalah? And I just started talking. And so they hired me on the spot to be the director of this documentary. It was actually on PBS. It's called Kaballah Me. I don't really like the name. The working title was The Orchard, but they wanted the word Kabbalah in the title, but it was a movie about Kabbalah. So I came to Tzfat many years ago. And so I knew of Tzfat, and I knew that it was a center for Kabbalah. So it was on my map, even though it seemed like a place where I would never live, because it feels, anybody who's been to Tzfat, you have this very strange kind of experience where you going up a mountain, and when you get to the top and you start to walk around, you feel like you're living in a place above time and space, meaning nobody cares what time it is, and there's a lot of people who are very, out there, and people are studying and very spiritual, and there's a lot of religious people, but not exclusively religious people, but there are a lot of observant Jews here, but there's also people who are secular, and it's just a very dynamic place with artists and drugs, mostly marijuana, but still a lot of drinking and partying, but a very spiritual place, very pure kind of partying. It's not a wild kind of like beach scene. It's just people who are getting together in a very, holy way to sing and to pray and to have these festive meals. But anyway, so I knew of Tzfat, and when I was having a very hard time, I decided I'm going to go to Israel. And this was maybe 5 years ago. I just said, I can't take it anymore. My life is so hard. There's a lot of personal tragedies in my family and other crises, and I was in a desperate place. And so I came to Israel. I tried out Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim, if we talk about the four energies, you have fire, water, earth, and air. And so you have Yerushalayim is fire, Hebron is earth, Tiberia is water, and Tzfat is air. And so I tried out of Yerushalayim, and although it was an amazing city and holy and cool, there's a lot of very cool people there, interesting people there. The energy for me was not right. I was feeling anxious there. And then I tried out Tel Aviv. I went to a yeshiva in Tel Aviv, and I also didn't like the energy there. I felt like I was being torn in half. I felt that the religious people were very religious and kind of strict, and the secular people were very anti-religious or, also kind of opinionated. And that's just because of where I was holding, but that's the way I felt there, the energy. And I was desperate. I went back to the States, and I was not interested in going back to Israel. And I was and it was there in the States, and my family was telling me, you look very depressed, you look very sad, you're just, maybe you want to go back to Israel. And I did not want to go back to Israel because I just felt that, and I was there for probably over a year at that point. And I had come many times. I come over that period of where I was going through this transformation. I came to Israel at least 10 times, because in the film business, especially in New York, after New Year's, there's a dead point where nothing's happening. Nothing's happening in advertising, and it's too cold to be outside, so people aren't making movies there. And so I would come every winter, or almost every year I was coming to Israel. But then I had spent like this whole year and a half or whatever it was in Israel, and I came back to New York. And my older brother, who's also observant, he's an observant Jewish guy, modern, but very observant, very holy guy. He likes to go to rabbis. He likes to go to Kabbalists, Makubals, who come to travel. There's these people who come from Israel, and they travel around, and you meet with them, and they give you some kind of advice. And sometimes it's like you feel that they know things about you that they shouldn't know. Like, they somehow have some kind of, higher powers. So my older brother likes to go to these rabbis. And so I went to this rabbi, and because my brother dragged me to go, and I'm sitting there, and he said to me, "So your life is good?" And I said, "No, it's not." That's what I said. And so he was surprised by my frankness, and then he went into a trance. And when he came out of his trance, he said to me, "Go to Tzfat." And he said to me, "You'll have a tikkun in Tzfat," which means your life will be fixed in Tzfat. And so I came to Tzfat on his advice. It took me like maybe 2 or 3 months to get back to Israel after I had that meeting with this rabbi. And anyway, so when I got to Tzfat, I wasn't working. I'm going to tell this quick, cute story. So I came to Tzfat, I wasn't working. So I said to myself, okay, I'll live in like a communal bunkhouse, and I'll eat my meals in the falafel stand, and I won't have a kitchen necessarily, and I won't have I'll go to the mikveh if I need a shower. I was thinking that way, like I'm not working, and so I don't know what I'm going to do here, and so I don't want to pay rent or a lot of rent. And so anyway, I heard about an apartment. I went for the apartment, and it was a beautiful apartment. It was small, but it was beautiful. And I was like, oh, I can't afford this thing. And then the guy told me the rent, and it turns out that the rent in Tzfat is around half of Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim, not less. So it turned out to be like $600 a month, the rent. And so I was like, so I took it. So then I was there for a few months, and I realized that, the rabbi who I saw in New York he's the Biala Rebbe. He's a famous Hasidic Kabbalist. And so I said I should go and thank him and tell him that I'm living in Tzfat. And so I went to Tel Aviv, to Bnei Brak, to visit him and to tell him I'm in Israel. You told me to move to Israel, and I'm to Tzfat, and now I live in Tzfat. So I went there to tell him, and when I walked in the room, I waited for like 3 hours to meet with him. And then when I finally walked in the room, the first thing that he said to me is, "How is the apartment that I got you?" Yeah. So I was like stunned. I was like, whoa. I was like, "It's a beautiful apartment." I said, and I didn't respond to the fact that he's saying that I just listened, and I said, it was just very, we don't understand how people have these spiritual powers and all this stuff, but yeah, it was interesting that he said that.
So I'm floored. So
is that the apartment you're in?
No, I'm in an even nicer apartment. So I was in the apartment that was in the same building, but it's much smaller. And then I started working in film production here, which we could talk about. And my place was too small. And then, we talked about surrender and letting go and letting God, steer the car. I very much in my journey realized I have no idea how to make my life better. I have no power to do it. And I have no way to know what's good for me and what's bad for me. I completely surrender. And whatever God has for me, I really got into that space in Tzfat, where we call it hashgacha pratit, where you just divine intervention or divine guidance. And I literally got, and this again, Tzfat is constant praying, constant meditation, constant having these spiritual conversations. And it's it's like a spiritual boot camp, Tzfat. And so it's not like, oh, I'm having this conversation with you now. This is 24/7, and Tzfat is this conversation about spirituality, about growth, about this. So it's really like a boot camp here. You have high octane change when you come to Tzfat, and it's not for everybody, but still. So I was very much in that headspace, and so I was in this apartment that was beautiful but very small. And then as soon as I started working in film production, my neighbor moved out, and I moved to this bigger apartment, which you see behind me. It's exquisite. This is actually, you can't see it because of it's overexposed, but these are the mountains of Meron. So my apartment looks out over the hills of Meron. I literally stare at the kever of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is my view out of my apartment, and you see the woodwork and the stonework. So I just can't believe that I'm living like this in such a beautiful apartment, and now I have a place to have a studio. I have my studio is here, and so it's a good segue for me to talk about. I'm trying to be short because I feel like maybe we don't have all the time in the world here. But so when I got to Tzfat, I didn't have any plans to do anything but try to feel better about myself and try to get healthy mentally and emotionally and spiritually. But I just started to talk to people and tell people that I used to make films and I'm in the film business. And so basically I've bought a camera, and I knew that I wanted I bought a very, very powerful computer in the States. When I came to Israel, I said to myself, I need something to occupy my time. So I bought a Mac, a very expensive computer that can handle, editing and everything. And so although in New York, I had a production company where I was only writing and directing, I wasn't shooting. I would never shoot. And I had a lot of resistance to like getting out of my lane, in anything. So I was, I always played to my strengths. I'm a writer and a director. And so I didn't do anything else. And also on the set, you don't change jobs. If you're the director, you have a cameraman, you have a sound man. The sound man is the only person who's involved in sound, and the cameraman is the only person who makes. But here, I don't have those options. This is not a filmmaking town spot. And so I just bought a camera, a 90D, a Canon 90D, and I started working on Da Vinci, and I started working. And so turns out that in Tzfat, it's a very hip community in a lot of ways. It's a very cool community in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people who are iconoclastic and out of the box thinkers, hippies and misfits, people who end up here who are, spiritual visionaries. You have people here from the Ivy League, people here who are like healers who found themselves drawn to Tzfat. And like everybody here in Tzfat has the kind of story that I'm telling about ending up in Tzfat is everybody in Tzfat has that story. It's like the Tzfat story is like, I was a banker, I was a therapist, I was a this, I was a that, and now I'm in Tzfat. I don't know how I got here, and my old life is gone, and now here I am in the new life. And so in Tzfat, there's this constant conversation about how the world is in collapse and there's a world crisis, and that we're going through a transition. You can call it Mashiach, you can call it, evolution, whatever you want to call it, whatever your language is, but the whole world is feeling that things are, 9/11, COVID, banking crisis, all the refugee crisis in Europe. We see that these, this is a cosmic change in the universe that seems to be happening. You see people having the same conversation in different ways in academia, in religious world, in the cultural worlds, in Hollywood. People are having these conversations like what's happening to the world. We're going through this dramatic, palpable shift. And so, and I'm not the only one. Like I said, this is everybody who's in Tzfat says, God brought me here with my skill set to do something here. And so over the last 3-4 months, I've decided, because I'm just working so much, I'm working with spiritual teachers and Torah institutions and artists making media so that they can get, Tzfat is a small place, but now with the internet, we have an ability to reach out globally, and you can sell on Amazon, and you can reach a global audience. And we all know that there are people online who are reaching millions of people, spiritual teachers now. You go on YouTube, we have people in Tzfat who speak to tens of thousands of people a week on their classes. And so I'm opening up a Tzfat production studio here, which is going to have, it's already happening. I'm just, starting to get organized, a la carte services for people in Tzfat who are trying to spread the light. And so I don't take a position on people's beliefs or on people's which organization they belong. There's many organizations in Tzfat. There's Ascent, which is a Kiruv organization. There's Livnot, which is like the Birthright, sister organization. There's other Chabad institutions. There's Ashlag Kabbalah people who I study Ashlag in addition to Chassidut. And there's Breslov people. And so you have all these people who came to Tzfat not knowing why they were brought here and feeling this kind of, spiritual communication, this kind of like awareness that something is happening and we're here for a reason and we're building something. And this is not something that I'm saying. This is the constant conversation of people in Tzfat, to the point where it's a lot of times we feel silly about saying it. You feel like, how did I become such a weirdo? How did I end up like this, talking in this language? You sound like a little bit of a kook. But this is the conversation in Tzfat, that the world is changing and that we have wisdom and knowledge. And this is, for whatever reason, this is our life. And we want to reach out to the world. And, if you just, all you have to do is look at Jewish prophecy, and the same thing in Christian prophecy and Islamic prophecy. This is what they talk about, that the world is going to finally come to a point, a critical mass, where people are going to have to learn to live in a better way, a more holistic way, a more communal way, a more loving way. And everybody's part of this show. And so I feel very much that I've been brought here to do this and that I have the skills. I started shooting and I'm like, I don't shoot. I'm not a shooter. I'm a director. And lo and behold, I started shooting and I'm like, oh, I can shoot. And I'm like, I don't have an editor. These budgets are tiny. We're talking about $500 for a job, $700 for a job. In New York, that would be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for the same job. And here I'm doing it for like $300 to $700 to $1,200, depending on which institution I'm working with. And I said, you know what? There's nobody here to edit. I have to edit. And I'm like, and because I'm doing all the spiritual work, I'm like open to it. And I'm like, I promise you, in New York, if somebody said to me, you edit it, I would be like, I would get angry. I would be like, what? I'm not an editor. Get me the editor. I'm not pushing the buttons. This is not my job. Get me the guy who really does this, Or like somebody says, you do the camera. I'm not doing it. Give me the real cameraman. I want a real guy who can do this for real. I'm not gonna pretend that I can do this. And even though I can do it better than the average person, wasn't doing it all day long. And so I just was not forced is the wrong word. I was invited into all of these new, these places of resistance where I'm just doing things that I never thought I would be doing. And so that's what I'm up to. I just want to say one more thing. That I'm writing a book, and again, we have to have maybe a longer podcast, but I'm writing a book on all of this, and the book is called The Secular Humanist Guide to Torah Judaism, or How to Become a Good Person in Just Under 6,000 Years. And basically, it's a conversation. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good title, if I say so myself. And it's basically the conversation that we've been having, which is how do you have a conversation between very smart, very well-meaning secular humanists, meaning secular people who are they're not within a religious construct. They don't necessarily believe in God, and people who are deeply steeped in spiritual traditions that are housed in a religion. How do we start to have the conversation and share the wisdom? Because I watched, Jordan Peterson's a bad example because he's religious. He's not a secular person. But if you look at some of the people like Eric Weinstein, Lex Friedman, some of the other people on part of the intellectual dark web, these are very smart, very well-meaning, very educated, secular people. And I often feel like the only piece of the conversation that's not happening is that, let me tell you what it says about this topic in Chassidut and Kabbalah, and maybe we can find a new language where we can kind of start to fix, work on some of these solutions for these problems with more information. And that's not such an easy nut to crack, because you have to in Kabbalah, it's called Hester Kafel, which means double darkness, which means if you're inside of a frame, you have to unpack, you have to get out of your frame and then get into a new frame. You can't jump from a frame to another frame. You have to change the lens. You have to change the perspective. You have to change the language. You have to change the definitions. And right, the structure, the framework of the conversation has to be, and these people are good at that. These are smart, intellectual, educated people who are well-meaning. They want to change the world for better. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm hoping that, and this is where, for whatever reason, I found myself between these two worlds. I mean, that the secular, multicultural, secular academic world, and the deeply spiritual, inner core of the religious world. That this is not religion for, we call it the exterior of the Torah, where you're doing the rituals, but your mind is not necessarily focused on spiritual change. But there's in Tzfat, the emphasis is on the spiritual work. There are people who are very into the ritual and the structure and the halacha and keeping kosher and keeping Shabbos and keeping all the things for sure. And I'm personally one of those people, and I believe that the two work best together. But the point is that in Tzfat, the inner aspect, the spiritual process is what is forefront here in the conversation and the way people are living their lives. And so I'm hoping that with people like you, with the both of you, that we build a community where there's a way to somehow, bridge this divide. And the way to do it is if you have people who are well-meaning on both sides, who are educated in their field, and they have the muscles to step out of their own perspective and be able to hear something that they completely don't, it's called a mind experiment, where you completely change your reference points and say, what if, imagine a world where God did exist. Imagine a world where we knew that there have been people in the past who have broken the veil between the physical and the spiritual realms and are communicating with higher forces, beings, however you want to describe it. Imagine you have that conversation. The people who are most suited to have that conversation are the quantum physicists, are the biologists, are those people. And I feel like we're getting to a point where there's like a convergence, where these worlds are coming together, and there's just a little gap there where, it's like almost like quantum physics, which is now breaking down in itself, and there's a lot of problems within quantum physics, and they're not sure what's happening over there in that world, but that's a separate conversation. That world is like butting up against the world of Chassidut and Kabbalah. It's almost like the conversation to quantum physics goes up to here, and then the conversation continues in Chassidut and Kabbalah. And so I think that this is happening. I think that it's these kind of connections that we're making now is proof that this is, as if we need more proof, is that something is happening and something new is happening, and that we are actually the people who are going to be involved in this community. And I think that very exciting things are happening, and that we are about to see something new, where there's, you have chesed and gevur, you have these two things that are not supposed to mix or not supposed to be able to work together. And that if the world of science and the world of Torah, they used to be like, hey, this faith and reason do not mix. And these are two different entities. And I think that that's not true. It used to be true, and it's still true, but it's not going to be true tomorrow, which is meaning that tomorrow there is definitely going to be a interface. And it doesn't happen, I hope I'm making sense now, I hope I'm not getting too convoluted, but it's not going to happen at this level. It happens when you can't make sense together of what you're saying because they don't mix. You have to find you have to rise above it and find something new. And this would be called in the world, in the conversation of Kabbalah, that's called the Messianic era, a complete cosmic jump higher, where you are looking down. Imagine you're looking down at the Torah as we know it, and you're looking down at science as we know it, and from a higher vantage point, you're like, oh, there's some way that these things can happen together. And I don't know how better to describe it, because I don't know what's going to happen, but it feels like something is going to happen there, and we don't know how it's going to make sense, but it's going to start to make sense.
Well, you said the chesed and the gevura don't mix, but earlier you were talking about this living in a reality paradox, and that's the state. It's like we're a body and a soul, we're a soul and a body, and the right and the left merge to form that in the Kabbalah of Tiferet, of harmony, of where 1 + 1 = 10 or 100. But the sum is greater than the whole of its sum is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
I
And
would
that's
also like to suggest that in some sense the separation is an illusion in a sense.
Is what?
The separation in the first place is an illusion. It's not that the body isn't part of it, if that makes sense. It just looks like it's like you said beautifully in the beginning, like you can identify with the dying caterpillar or with the butterfly, but they are not two different things essentially. The one is,
Exactly. So this, I'm concerned that this is going to become a Kabbalah class, but this is why I tell people that they should be studying. I have a friend who is a brilliant artist who just came up to visit me, and he's so spiritually aware, and he's discussing all these things. And I said, it's interesting, except that you're not reading the books, and so you're having this. You're telling me about this thing that you just figured out, but it would be nice if you were actively studying so that you can understand that these conversations are the very conversations that are in the book. And so to answer your question about whether or not these things go together, you're very astute in your observation. What I meant to say is, or what the way that we need to think about this is that they don't go together until you do something that allows them to come together. So like you have the body and the soul. And so these two things that's God's trick, that God put these two things together that are opposites, the soul and the body, but we are not God, so we have to do the actual work. And so how do you marry science and faith? How do you put those two things together? I hope I'm making sense. That you have to do something in order to make them go together. So chesed and gevura are meant to come together, right? So in Judaism, you have all of the separation that leads to unity. You have the weekdays and Shabbat. You have milk and meat. You have men and women. These are things that don't go together unless you do something to make them harmoniously go together. They're oppositional forces. And that when you do put them together, you have to do that by rising above the contradictions. And that is the very ladder of consciousness. And so when I say they don't go together, I mean they need to go together, but they don't go together. And so this is why we imagine you were going to go on a camping trip and you had flour and you had water. Now, although we want to make bread, you want to make sure that the flour never gets wet and that the water never gets dirt inside of it. And so although you're carrying these two elements in order to synthesize them, in order to bring them together to make something that you want, most of your day is spent making sure that the flour stays dry and doesn't get any moisture in it, and to make sure the liquid doesn't get any dirt in it. So this is where, if you start to appreciate the system, the structure of Judaism, is that we're not separating men and women because we don't want men and women to come together. We want them to come together in a harmonious, beautiful, lasting way. We're not separating Jews and Gentiles, God forbid, because we want them to stay separate. No, we're doing it because if you have an army, humanity is an army trying to reach a better future, you have different units. And so if you have a unit that's doing logistics, and you have a unit that's doing fighting, and you have a unit that's doing cooking, you're all on the same team. But the people who are preparing the food, if they don't end up preparing the food, we're going to have a very big problem. So they can't get confused by their job. And so you have units and you have separation in order for the system to work together. And so in Kabbalah, we talk about the soul body. And so in a body, you have, and the structure of the universe is structured like a body. And so we have the lungs and the heart and the stomach. And these organs are all working together to serve the purpose of the mind, to have a life. But you don't, because you know that, you don't mix the stomach and you don't breach the wall between the stomach and the kidneys or whatever, then you have a very big problem. And so The Torah system is a system that ritualizes separation in order to synthesize in a understandable, methodical, beautiful way. And that's not fun. It's not fun to spend 80% of your time not getting together for the 20% of the time that you do get together, but the payoff is so dramatic. And so it's not a payoff, an incremental payoff, it's a transcendent payoff. We're going to be, if we do that and we put the global community together in a perfect way, in a beautiful way, in a harmonious way, in a way that everybody serves the whole, it's going to be many times better. It's not going to be just a little bit better. That's why it's worth it to do all of this hard work, 6,000 years of development in order to have the seventh day, right? So the days of the week, you have 6 days, you have 6,000 years, and you have the Shabbat is after that. And so Shabbat is the time when we try to get in the headspace of the end game, how it's going to end up being, where you don't work and everybody shares everything and everybody loves everybody and everybody's concerned about everybody else and not about themselves. Sounds easy, but how do you do that? And so that's the actual agenda. That's God's agenda, and that's the agenda of the Torah, and that's the agenda of all humanity. It doesn't matter if you are secular or religious or Christian or Jewish, it does not matter. What matters is that everybody is trying to get to a place where things work. And how do they work? They work when everybody is onto themselves, but serving the greater whole. And that's, yeah.
And
I hope that made sense. I have no idea if that made sense.
It makes it.
That made a lot of sense. And like I'm personally, I was born with a very strong, I don't know how to say that, but like basically the technical aspect of life comes easy to me. And, but especially that's something in my relationship also with Ari, where there is like, Ari sees it, and then there is, okay, that's it. And then he kind of can lift me a little bit and I can see it, but then we don't see the details. Like there's something in the actualizing, there's a lot of work to go into the details. And I'm not even sure why I'm saying that, like how it connects to what we just spoke about. It just seems to be the right thing to say. So, yeah, so I guess if I died, but I think it's more like the contradictory kind of aspect that you mentioned before, that there's the inspirational part and then there's the more like technical side of things. And now I know why I'm saying that, because you guys are just going ahead and you're just doing that. I mean, you move from Hollywood to Tzfat of all places, and and now you're building that whole thing. And in some way there is it seems to be that music is a big part of Tzfat, at least from the events that I experienced. And a very similar thing is happening here. And you mentioned, like a potential reaching out to each other and, like bringing some of what you have over there to the world. And it seems to be happening already. So yeah, to me, it looks like you're right on. It's just happening anyways, just and in a very similar way, we are feeling that we are standing in a stream, Ari and me, of something that's happening anyways, and we're just we're just the right people at the right time in the right place to be the tools that's supposed to happen through. So in that sense, I would like to Ari
that's
to
exactly why, David, that's exactly why you said what you said, because you're the only person who can do what you do. You're here because you can do something that nobody else can do here, and we don't know what it is yet. And you find yourself in this conversation with people, and you're like, hey, you guys are doing this thing, and now here I am, and I do something else, and I'm not sure how it fits together. But that's the beauty of it, is that what they talk about in Hasidut, about the horse on the rider, and in Kabbalah they talk about the hand in the glove. In other words, when you get out of the way, when you surrender, this force starts working through you, and you don't even know why you're in the room. But then when somebody's going to say, how do we do this? And then you're going to be sitting there for like 2 years. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, I know exactly how to do that. And then, so you're here because you can do something that no one else can do. And you want, without you as part of this, whatever is happening now, it's not going to work. And so that's why you said what you said, because you don't know why you said it, but we're going to find out why you said it. That's the magic that happens in this kind of spiritual space. Yeah.
And that's probably true for every single person. But Ari, I really want you to tell a little bit about Soji and yourself. You have to do
that. Yes. Well, in terms of, first of all, I love everything that you're talking about, and we could go on for like, maybe we could have like the first, I had this vision when I was at Powtoon, this company, that's where Dave and I met about 7 years ago. I said, we should have a 24-hour webinar. That was like a big idea at the time. So they have 3 hours, we should have like a 24-hour podcast, because there's a lot of ground to cover. And you've got a lot, also what you're merging of the expertise in narrative, in filmmaking, and the level of professionalism and skill set to use that for the purpose that you're using it for, which is expanded consciousness to a degree, is a tremendous opportunity that is only capable and possible because of the skill set and because of your unique, soul and essence and desire, and that's a very exciting thing, and very excited to see where that goes and how people use it, and definitely want to read the book. I think for my own journey, the Zoom thing, it's funny because it keeps out this like timer.
It keeps cutting you out.
Keeps cutting us out.